Chapter 1. The Night My Stepfather Hit Me in the Hospital. The night my stepfather slapped me out of a hospital bed, the nurse thought it was just a family argument. But 2 weeks later, I discovered he had secretly opened 5 credit cards and 2 loans in my name, worth almost $70,000, while taking out 3 life insurance policies on my mother, worth more than $2 million, with himself as the only beneficiary. And the moment federal investigators finally raided the bowling parking lot, where he thought he was safe, everything collapsed. The same man who told my grieving mother he would save our family was later sentenced to federal prison. My name is Celia Hart, and this is the story of how the man who tried to steal my identity and profit from my mother's death ended up destroying his own life instead. 3 days after emergency surgery, my stepfather walked into my hospital room and asked how much my mistake had cost him. The room smelled shappily of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol, the kind of sterile scent that seems to settle in the back of your throat. A heart monitor beside my bed beeped in slow, steady intervals, the sound echoing softly through the quiet hospital room. I lay there under the fluorescent lights of Mercy Regional Hospital in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with an IV line taped into my arm and a thick white bandage across the lower part of my stomach. The surgery had happened only 3 days earlier. Doctors told me my appendix had been close to rupturing when I came in. If I had waited longer, the infection could have spread through my abdomen. Now, every small movement sent a tight, painful pull through my stitches. The nurse had told me several times that afternoon to stay still and let my body heal. It was just before 7 in the evening when the door opened. For a moment, I thought it was the night nurse returning to check my medication. I turned my head slowly toward the doorway. Instead, Victor Langley stepped inside. Victor had been my stepfather for a little over 3 years. Tall, broad-shouldered, always dressed like he had just walked out of a business meeting, even when he was only running errands around town. He closed the door quietly behind him and walked toward the hospital bed. He did not ask how I felt. He did not ask how the surgery had gone. The first thing he noticed was the billing monitor mounted on the wall beside my bed. Hospitals display a running total of medical charges on a small digital screen. Victor stood there staring at the numbers while the pale light from the monitor reflected across his face. His jaw tightened. Then he looked at me. "Avery, do you understand how much this is going to cost?" My name is Avery Cole. At the time, I was 30 years old and working as an operations assistant at a regional trucking company called Iron Ridge Transport just outside Harrisburg. "Insurance should cover most of it," I said quietly. "The doctor already explained that." Victor barely reacted. He exhaled slowly and shook his head like someone who had just discovered something deeply disappointing. "Unbelievable." He said the word under his breath at first. Then his voice rose. "You go to the emergency room because your stomach hurts, and suddenly we are staring at thousands of dollars in hospital bills." "It was not just a stomach ache," I said. "They told me my appendix was about to rupture." Victor waved his hand dismissively. "People feel pain every day. That does not mean they rush into surgery." Near the window, my mother stood very still. Her name was Linda Cole. After my father died, she started working part-time as a receptionist at a dental clinic in town. Right now, she stared down at the tile floor as if studying it carefully. She did not interrupt. Victor took another step closer to the bed. "You need to get back to work as soon as they release you," he said. "This family cannot afford to support someone lying around doing nothing for 2 weeks." "The surgeon told me not to lift anything for at least 10 days, I said. Victor leaned slightly over the metal rail of the bed. "You are young. You will recover." My stomach tightened beneath the bandage. "I can barely stand right now." Victor looked at me for several seconds. His expression did not show concern, it showed judgment. "You know what the real problem is, Avery?" I waited. "You always make everything about you." The words hung in the air. "You always have some kind of crisis that everyone else has to clean up. Your mother works all day, and now we are supposed to deal with another massive medical bill because you decided your stomach pain was an emergency." I felt heat rising in my face. "I did not decide anything. The doctor said it could have killed me." Victor leaned closer. Doctors say a lot of things when they want to charge people more. My hands tightened around the blanket. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Victor placed one hand on the metal rail of the bed and bent slightly so his face was only a few feet from mine. "You need to stop acting like the world revolves around you," he said quietly. "This family already has enough problems without you draining it even more." The words hit harder than I expected. My stomach throbbed beneath the bandage. I tried to sit up straighter, but the movement pulled painfully against the stitches. Victor noticed. His expression narrowed. "See, that reaction right there. Always dramatic." "I'm not pretending," I said. He straightened slowly. "People like you always have an excuse." Then his hand moved. The motion happened so quickly I barely registered it. His palm struck the side of my face with a loud crack that echoed across the hospital room. My head snapped sideways. Because I had been sitting partly upright, the force pushed me off balance. The mattress shifted beneath me. Suddenly, I was sliding, then falling. My shoulder hit the floor first. The IV line jerked violently from my arm, and the heart monitor erupted in a shrill electronic alarm. Pain exploded through my abdomen as the stitches pulled against the incision. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Footsteps pounded in the hallway. The door burst open. Rebecca Tran, the evening nurse, rushed inside, followed by 2 hospital security officers. "What happened here?" Her voice cut through the alarm of the heart monitor. I tried to push myself upright, but another wave of pain rolled through my stomach. "He hit me!" I gasped. Victor immediately stepped away from the bed. His entire posture changed within seconds. "She lost her balance and slipped," he said calmly. Rebecca looked from him to me. Officer Marcus Hill from the Harrisburg Police Department entered the room moments later after security called the incident in. He knelt beside me while the nurse checked the IV line. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" My thoughts felt slow from the medication still running through my veins. "My stepfather hit me," I said. Victor let out a short, controlled laugh. "I never touched her. She's clearly disoriented from medication." Officer Hill wrote several lines into a small notebook. Rebecca helped lift me back onto the bed while the heart monitor continued its loud warning tone. After a few minutes, the officer closed the notebook. "We are documenting the incident tonight. Because of her medical condition, we may need a formal statement later once she's stable enough." Victor nodded politely. "Of course, officer. I only want what is best for my family." The words made my stomach twist. Security escorted him out of the room. Just before stepping through the doorway, Victor looked back at me. His expression was not angry. It was calm, cold, calculated. When the door finally closed, the room became quiet again. Rebecca adjusted the blanket over me and carefully checked the bandage across my stomach. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "If you ever feel unsafe at home, I can give you the number for a support hotline. They help people in situations like this." I nodded slowly. At that moment, I thought the worst part of that night had already happened. Lying there staring at the ceiling while the steady beep of the heart monitor echoed beside me, I started thinking about the day Victor Langley first walked into our lives 3 years ago. Back then, my mother believed he had saved our family. What none of us understood was that by the time he married her, he had already destroyed 3 others. Chapter 2. The Man Who Saved My Mother. 3 years before my stepfather hit me in that hospital room, my family was already hanging by a thread. My father died in the spring of 2019 after a long fight with lung cancer. The last year of his illness drained nearly everything we had: hospital bills, medications, specialist visits, travel to oncology clinics. By the time the funeral ended, my mother and I both understood the quiet truth we did not want to say out loud. We were almost broke. We lived in a small house outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where people left porch lights on at night and waved when they drove past each other. My father had always been the steady center of that life. When he was gone, the house felt hollow. My mother, Diane Carter, returned to her part-time job at the Columbus Public Library. The pay was modest and the hours were unpredictable, but she took every shift they offered. I had been in my 3rd year at Ohio State when my father became too weak to care for himself. I left school and took a full-time administrative job at a regional shipping company called Buckeye Freight Services. My paycheck helped keep the mortgage current and food in the refrigerator. For months, our evenings followed the same routine: bills spread across the kitchen table, my mother staring at numbers through tired eyes, trying to decide which payment could wait and which one could not. Then Victor Langley appeared. My mother met him during a small community book discussion that met twice a month in a cafe near the library. She mentioned him casually one evening when she came home later than usual. "There was a man there tonight who stayed after the meeting to talk," she said, while placing her purse on the counter. "Very polite, very thoughtful." "What does he do?" I asked. "Business consulting," she said. "Apparently he helps companies restructure finances." A few weeks later, I met him. Victor arrived one Saturday afternoon carrying 3 coffees and a box of pastries. He was tall, confident, dressed neatly in a way that made him stand out from the usual people who visited our house. He shook my hand firmly. "Nice to meet you, Avery. Your mother tells me you stepped up when your family needed you." His voice had a calm confidence that made people relax quickly. Over the next few months, Victor started appearing more often. He fixed a broken faucet in our kitchen without being asked. He spent an afternoon helping my mother untangle several confusing insurance letters that had been piling up since my father died. One evening, I came home from work and found him cooking pasta at the stove. "Thought Diane deserved a night off," he said with an easy smile. My mother laughed in a way I had not heard since before my father got sick. It felt like someone had stepped into our struggling life and quietly steadied the ground beneath us. By early 2020, they were talking about marriage. I remember asking my mother about it one night after Victor left. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. She looked at me with a hopeful expression I had almost forgotten. "He makes me feel like things can be stable again," she said softly. They married in a small civil ceremony a few weeks later. At first, everything seemed normal. Victor moved into the house and almost immediately began discussing finances. One evening, he spread several folders across the dining room table and began organizing bank statements and bills. "If we want this household to recover financially, we need structure," he said while tapping the papers. My mother looked nervous. "What kind of structure?" Victor leaned back in his chair. "Someone needs to manage the financial strategy. That is what I do for companies." "You mean you want to handle our finances?" my mother asked. "Just temporarily," Victor replied smoothly. "Families in difficult situations often need guidance." Then he looked directly at me. "Avery, young adults often damage their credit without realizing it. If you let me review your accounts, I can make sure everything is on track." I hesitated. I had always handled my own expenses. Victor folded his hands together. Trust me, he said calmly. Families like yours collapse financially when no one understands how money actually works. My mother placed her arm on me. He's just trying to help us. So I agreed. That decision would come back to haunt me. Over the next year, Victor slowly inserted himself into every financial detail of the household. He wanted access to every bill. He asked about my exact salary at Buckeye Freight Services. $43,000 before taxes, I said one evening while he wrote numbers in a small notebook. And your monthly expenses. Car insurance, gas, my share of groceries. Victor nodded as if building a financial map. Several months later, something strange happened at work. One afternoon, the HR manager asked me to come to her office. Her expression looked uncomfortable. Avery, we ran a routine background update for employee files and something unusual appeared on your credit report. My stomach tightened. What kind of problem? Your credit score dropped significantly over the past few months. Did you recently open several credit accounts? No, I said immediately. Later that night, I checked my credit report. The numbers stared back at me from the screen. 538. Just months earlier, it had been above 700. My hands started to shake. I showed the report to Victor that evening. He studied the screen calmly. That is likely a reporting error from a financial institution. A drop like that cannot happen without activity, I said. Sometimes banks make mistakes, Victor replied smoothly. Leave it to me and I will sort it out. I wanted to believe him, so I did. Around that same time, my mother began changing in small but noticeable ways. She stopped meeting friends for coffee on Saturday mornings. She stopped attending the book club where she first met Victor. When I asked her about it, she looked uncomfortable. Victor thinks people sometimes take advantage when they know a family is struggling financially, she said quietly. He just wants to protect us. Victor also converted our spare bedroom into a home office. A week later, he installed a lock on the door. One afternoon, I tried to open it to grab a spare charger. The handle wouldn't turn. Victor appeared behind me in the hallway. That room is for work only, he said calmly. Even Mom can't go in there? I asked. Business documents should remain private, he replied. I nodded slowly, even though something about it felt wrong. Over the following months, I noticed another pattern. Victor received an unusual amount of mail. Not ordinary local letters, large envelopes from different states, California, Nevada, Florida, Arizona. Every time the mail arrived, Victor seemed to appear almost instantly at the front door. He gathered the envelopes quickly and carried them straight into his locked office. One afternoon, I stepped on the porch just as the mail carrier placed a thick stack inside the mailbox. Victor opened the door behind me almost immediately. I'll take those, he said, as he reached past me. For a brief second, I saw several return addresses. A debt collection agency, a financial services company, a law office from Arizona. Victor closed the office door a moment later, and standing there in the hallway, I felt a quiet, uneasy thought begin forming in the back of my mind. For the first time, I wondered what kind of business consultant received letters like that from half the country. Chapter 3. The Room He Never Let Anyone Enter. For 2 weeks after the night in the hospital, I could not stop thinking about the locked office door at the end of the hallway. Victor acted as if nothing unusual had happened. He spoke politely at dinner. He asked my mother about her day at the library. He even asked me once if my recovery was going well. But every time I walked past that door, I remembered the envelopes from different states and the way he always grabbed the mail before anyone else could see it. Something about him no longer felt like kindness. It felt like control. 2 weeks later, Victor announced that he would be leaving town for the weekend. We were sitting at the kitchen table when he said it. I have a bowling tournament in Atlantic City, he explained while checking something on his phone. Corporate event, mostly networking. My mother looked impressed. I did not know you were still in bowling leagues. Victor smiled in that calm, confident way he always used. Business relationships happen in strange places. Friday morning, he packed a small black suitcase and left just after 8. I watched through the living room window as his sedan disappeared down the street. The house felt strangely quiet after he was gone. All day, the thought kept returning. The locked office. That night, my mother went to bed early after finishing a long shift at the library. By 11, the house was silent. I stood in the hallway, staring at the office door. The small brass lock reflected the soft light from the hallway lamp. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. Part of me wanted to walk away. Another part of me could not ignore the feeling that something inside that room explained everything. I went to my bedroom and searched through my desk until I found a paperclip. Back in the hallway, I knelt in front of the lock. My hands felt slightly unsteady as I straightened the metal wire. I slid it carefully into the keyhole. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then I felt a tiny movement inside the lock. A soft click followed. The door opened. Inside the room, the air smelled faintly of paper and printer ink. The office looked less like a personal workspace and more like a financial operations center. A large desk sat against the wall with a laptop placed neatly in the center. Filing cabinets lined one side of the room. Storage boxes were stacked carefully in the corner. Everything was perfectly organized. Too perfectly organized. I stepped inside and quietly closed the door behind me. For a moment, I simply listened to the silence of the house. Then I opened the top drawer of the desk. Pens, notepads, a calculator. Nothing unusual. The second drawer held several thick folders. One of them immediately caught my attention. A legal file. I pulled it out and opened it. The first page made my stomach tighten. Victor Langley. The document was a divorce record. The other name listed on the page was a woman named Melissa Grant from Wilmington, Delaware. Married in 2012, divorced in 2014. I turned the pages quickly. Protective order request, financial fraud allegation, court hearing documentation. My pulse started beating faster. I opened another drawer, another folder, another marriage. A woman named Cynthia Blake from Toledo, Ohio. Married in 2015, divorced in 2017. This file contained something even worse. Police incident report, domestic disturbance complaint, emergency restraining order. I swallowed hard. A third file sat underneath the others. Another woman, another marriage, another divorce. Every file told the same story. Short marriage, financial conflict, legal complaints, protective orders. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my pocket and began taking pictures of every page. Victor had never mentioned any of this. Not once. When I finished, I carefully returned the files to their exact positions. My attention moved slowly to the laptop sitting on the desk. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I opened it. The screen lit up immediately. No password. My chest tightened as I opened the email inbox. Dozens of messages appeared. Banks, credit card companies, loan providers. One subject line caught my eye. Account approval notification. I clicked it. The account holder name froze my breath. My name. My full legal name. My social security number. My address. But I had never opened that account. A cold wave moved through my chest. I opened another email, another credit card approval, then another. 5 different credit cards had been opened using my identity. I searched further through the inbox. 2 personal loan confirmations appeared next. The total balances across the accounts added up to more than $67,000. My breathing became uneven. My knees felt weak. I slowly lowered myself to the floor beside the desk. Victor had not just been managing our finances, he had been stealing my identity. For several minutes, I sat there staring at the glowing laptop screen while my thoughts raced. Then, something else caught my attention, a folder labeled insurance documents. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were scanned contracts, insurance policies. The name listed under the insured person made my stomach twist. My mother, Diane Carter. I opened the first policy. The beneficiary section listed a single name, Victor Langley. Coverage amount, $700,000. My hands began to shake as I opened the second policy. Another $700,000. The third policy appeared beneath it. $700,000 again. More than $2 million total. The room suddenly felt colder. My chest tightened as I stared at the numbers glowing on the screen. My mother had never mentioned life insurance policies like these. She barely understood financial paperwork. Victor must have arranged them himself. I closed the laptop slowly. My hands were still trembling. Standing there in that silent office, a realization began to form in my mind that made my stomach twist with a deep, heavy fear. Victor Langley was not just manipulating our lives. He might have been waiting for the moment when my mother was no longer alive to stop him. Chapter 4. The Pattern That Almost Killed My Mother. I barely slept that night after leaving Victor's office. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the insurance policies on the screen and the numbers that followed my mother's name. $2 million. My chest tightened each time I remembered how calm Victor had been while living in the same house with us. By morning, one thing was clear in my mind. Victor Langley had done this before. I sat at the kitchen table while the sun slowly rose through the window and opened my laptop. The photographs I had taken from the files in his office were still on my phone. Divorce records, legal complaints, protective orders. 3 different women whose lives had crossed Victor's path. I stared at their names for several minutes. Then I started searching. The first name I looked up was Cynthia Blake from Toledo, Ohio. It took nearly an hour of digging through old address records before I found a phone number that might still belong to her. My heart beat faster as I dialed. The phone rang 4 times. A woman answered cautiously. "Hello?" My throat felt tight. "Are you Cynthia Blake?" A short pause followed. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Avery Carter. I believe you were once married to a man named Victor Langley." Silence filled the line. When she finally spoke again, her voice sounded guarded. "Why are you asking about him?" "Because he is married to my mother now." Another long pause followed. Then her tone changed. "Send me proof." I texted her a photograph of the divorce paperwork I had found in Victor's desk. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone rang again. Cynthia sounded tense. "How long have you known him?" 3 years. She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "That fits the pattern." My stomach tightened. "What pattern?" "Victor never stays longer than 3 years," she said. "That is about how long it takes for everything to fall apart." A chill ran down my spine. "What did he do to you?" "He appeared right after my small business collapsed," she explained. "He was supportive at first, helpful, said he understood finances better than anyone else." My voice came out quietly. "That is exactly what he told my mother." "We married 6 months later," Cynthia continued. "Then he slowly took control of every account I had. Credit cards, loans, insurance." Her words felt painfully familiar. "Then one day I discovered several credit accounts opened in my name that I never approved." My chest tightened. "Identity theft." "Exactly." "What happened when you confronted him?" "He disappeared 2 weeks later," she replied. "Completely vanished."
Before we hung up, she said something that made my stomach twist. "You should talk to the other women." "The other women?" "The ones who married him before me." She gave me 2 more names: Danielle Mercer from Delaware, Patricia Nolan from Cleveland. By the end of the week, I had contacted both of them. Within days, the 4 of us were speaking regularly in a private group chat. Each of their stories sounded disturbingly similar. Victor always appeared during a moment of financial struggle. He presented himself as stable and trustworthy. Marriage followed quickly. Then came financial control, credit cards, loans, insurance policies. Danielle told me something else that made my blood run cold. "During the last year we lived together, I was constantly sick," she said during one call. "What kind of sick?" "Fatigue, dizziness, weakness. Doctors never found the cause." As she spoke, something clicked in my mind. My mother had been experiencing the same symptoms for months: constant exhaustion, frequent headaches, shortness of breath. Victor always insisted she was simply working too hard. Then I remembered something else. Every morning he handed her a small vitamin capsule. He always said it was important for her health. The next morning, I waited until Victor left the kitchen before quietly taking the bottle from the cabinet. The label said iron supplement, but something about it made my chest tighten. That afternoon, I scheduled an appointment with my mother's primary physician. Dr. Laura Bennett had treated my mother for years. When I arrived at the clinic, I placed the bottle on her desk. "I know this might sound strange, but could you have these capsules tested?" Dr. Bennett studied the label. "Has your mother been taking these regularly?" "Every morning." She nodded slowly. "We can send a sample to the lab." 3 days later, she called me. Her voice sounded serious. "Avery, I need you to come in." When I entered her office, she closed the door behind me. "We tested the capsules," she said, "and they contain a small amount of an anticoagulant medication." My stomach dropped. "A blood thinner?" "Yes," she said. "In small doses, it would not cause immediate harm, but over time, it could weaken the body and increase the risk of internal bleeding." My hands started shaking. "Someone has been giving this to my mother every day?" Dr. Bennett looked at me carefully. "Does she know what she has been taking?" "No." The room suddenly felt very small. While all of this was happening, Victor began pushing new financial discussions at home. One evening, he placed a stack of documents on the dining room table. "I think we should start planning for long-term stability," he said calmly. My mother looked confused. "What kind of planning?" "Legal protection," Victor replied smoothly. He slid the papers toward her. At the top of the first page, I saw the words immediately: "Power of attorney." My heart started pounding. My mother looked uncertain. "Is that really necessary?" Victor smiled gently. "Diane, life can change quickly. This simply allows me to manage things if you ever become ill." Then he leaned back in his chair. "And honestly, you deserve a break after everything you've been through." "What do you mean?" "I was thinking we should take a cruise, a long trip somewhere warm. You could finally relax." My mother looked surprised. "A cruise?" "You deserve it," Victor said warmly. "You have worked too hard for too long." I sat silently across the table while my heart pounded in my chest. Insurance policies, blood-thinning capsules, legal authority over her finances, and now a long trip away from home. Suddenly, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Victor Langley was speeding up whatever plan he had been quietly building, and if I did not stop him soon, my mother might never come back from that cruise.
Chapter 5. The night his plan collapsed. I spent the rest of that night sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and the evidence spread across the screen in front of me. The files from Victor's office, the credit reports, the photographs of the insurance policies, everything felt heavier now that I understood what it all meant. If I waited any longer, my mother might step onto that cruise ship with a man who had already planned how her story would end.
The next morning, I contacted an attorney whose name had been recommended by one of the women I had spoken to online. His office was in Cleveland, nearly 2 hours from our house, but I drove there anyway with a folder full of documents and a knot in my chest that would not loosen. The lawyer's name was Daniel Harper. He was in his mid-40s with calm eyes and the quiet patience of someone who had spent years listening to people tell difficult stories. I placed the folder on his desk and began explaining everything from the beginning. My father's death, Victor entering our lives, the credit accounts, the life insurance policies, the pills my mother had been taking every morning. Daniel flipped through the documents slowly. Then he looked up at me. "You did the right thing coming here before confronting him." My voice shook slightly. "Is there enough evidence to stop him?" "More than enough to begin an investigation," he said. Within 2 days, Daniel helped me file a formal identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission. That report triggered a federal inquiry into the accounts Victor had opened using my Social Security number. At the same time, Daniel connected me with an insurance fraud investigator named Gregory Sloan, who had spent nearly 20 years investigating suspicious life insurance claims. Gregory studied the 3 policies taken out on my mother. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his chin. 3 policies opened within the same year with the same beneficiary, he said quietly. That is the kind of pattern investigators watch for very closely. "Do you think he planned to hurt her?" Gregory did not answer immediately. But when someone secretly opens policies like this and also controls the person's finances and medication, it raises serious concerns. Over the next several weeks, investigators began building a case quietly behind the scenes. Bank records revealed that Victor had opened credit accounts under multiple identities tied to several women he had previously married. Loan applications had been submitted from computers in different states, but traced back to the same IP addresses. Every document strengthens the pattern. Victor Langley had not simply been manipulating our family. He had been running the same scheme for years. While investigators worked, life inside our house continued in an eerie routine. Every morning, Victor handed my mother the same bottle of capsules. Every morning, she swallowed one without question, and every morning, I felt a wave of anger rise inside me as I watched it happen. Then, Daniel called me one afternoon with a piece of news that changed everything. "Victor has registered for another bowling tournament in Atlantic City next month," he said. "Why does that matter?" I asked. "Because investigators believe he may attempt to move or withdraw money while traveling. If he does that, we will have grounds for immediate arrest." For the first time since discovering the files in Victor's office, I felt something close to hope. 3 weeks later, Victor packed his suitcase again. He stood in the kitchen that morning tying the laces of his bowling shoes while my mother poured him coffee. "You will only be gone for the weekend?" she asked. "Probably just one night," Victor said with a smile. "The tournament ends Saturday evening." He kissed her on the cheek before walking out the door. Watching him leave felt surreal. He had no idea that multiple investigators were already tracking his financial activity. Late Friday night, Daniel called me again. His voice was low but steady. "They're ready." "Ready for what?" "To arrest him." The next afternoon, Victor finished his tournament at a crowded bowling center just outside Atlantic City. According to the investigators, he walked out of the building carrying his bowling bag and scrolling through his phone. What he did not see were 2 unmarked vehicles parked across the lot. As Victor stepped off the curb, a pair of police officers approached him. A federal investigator followed seconds later. Victor stopped walking. One of the officers spoke first. "Victor Langley, you are under arrest for identity theft, insurance fraud, and financial exploitation." Witnesses later said Victor tried to laugh at first, as if it were some kind of mistake. "There must be a misunderstanding," he said. The investigator shook his head. "There is no misunderstanding." When the handcuffs closed around Victor's wrists, the laughter disappeared. Security camera footage later showed the moment clearly. For the first time, Victor looked afraid. When Daniel called to tell me it was over, I sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not of sadness, out of relief. The trial began in early 2025. Walking into the courtroom beside my mother felt like stepping into the final chapter of a story we had been trapped inside for years. The prosecutors laid out the case piece by piece. Financial records, credit applications, insurance documents, medical test results. 3 of Victor's former wives testified about the same pattern of manipulation and financial control. Each story sounded painfully familiar. One woman describes how Victor had convinced her to transfer her savings into accounts he controlled. Another explained how he had opened credit cards using her identity without permission. A third woman described how he disappeared after draining her finances. Then, Officer Marcus Hill testified about the night I was pushed from the hospital bed. His report documented Victor's aggression and controlling behavior in front of medical staff. By the time the prosecution finished presenting evidence, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Victor had spent more than a decade targeting women who were grieving, vulnerable, or financially unstable. He married them quickly, he gained control of their finances, then he exploited their identities for money. The insurance policies taken out on my mother were presented as the final stage of the plan. When the jury returned with the verdict, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty on multiple counts. My mother squeezed my hand so tightly I could feel it shaking. For the first time in years, I felt the constant weight in my chest begin to lift. Life did not instantly become perfect after the trial ended, but slowly things improved. The fraudulent credit accounts were removed from my record through the investigation process. My credit score gradually recovered. The house my parents had spent decades paying for remained ours. Most importantly, my mother's health began to improve once she stopped taking the capsules Victor had given her. Within a few months, the constant fatigue disappeared. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and smiled in a way I hadn't seen since before Victor entered our lives. "I should have trusted my instincts sooner," she said quietly. "You trusted someone who pretended to help. That's not your fault." Since the trial, I've spoken with several organizations that help victims of financial abuse and identity theft. Many of the stories I hear sound frighteningly similar to ours. That's one reason I decided to tell this story, because the warning signs often appear long before the damage becomes visible. Someone who pushes for quick marriage, someone who insists on controlling money, someone who isolates the people around them. Those signs matter. If you've ever seen behavior like that in your own life or in the life of someone you care about, trust that feeling and ask questions early. Sometimes recognizing the pattern is the first step to stopping it. If sharing our story helped even one person see those signs sooner, then everything my mother and I went through has at least helped someone else avoid the same trap. If you value stories where strength is quiet but unshakable, subscribe.